All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Mélanie Lafabrie. I'm the founder of aidóni, which is an international community and platform that aims to promote constructive and inclusive journalism around conflict. We connect journalists and agents of change so we can spark ideas and conversation to help journalism be better. And that's exactly what we did over the last few weeks and what we want to tell you about during this event. So, we, as you might know, published a guide on how to report on peace building effort in a more constructive way. It's called Community Centers Peace Journalism, Advice from Local Peacebuilders to Journalists. So what we did is that the aidóni team, here represented by Yusser Shari and Nicolette Terrier and myself, and with Ileana, who couldn't join us today, hosted an event at PeaceCon 24, which is a big international peace building conference, where we hosted a workshop called Storytelling Your Peace, Crafting a Collaborative Guide on Reframing Peace Building Journalism. During this workshop, we met lovely Ashley and Chip, who were two of the attendees that day. And we had peace builders, local peace builders, academics, creatives, and other profiles that work on peace and conflict resolution get together. We had what I think was an interesting conversation. And at the end of this workshop, the peace builders came up with 12 recommendations to journalists that we spent a few weeks working on, building on to create a guide, adding definitions, case studies, a bit of context, exercises to practice as a journalist, how to better report on peace building and peace-related topics. And today we are here to tell you a bit about the process of writing this guide, but also mainly to take the conversation a bit further. Because if you just want to see the guide, you can download it and read it. But we wanted to give you the opportunity to learn a bit more about why and how we think this work was useful, to learn a bit more about our co-authors, who, as you will see, have very diverse backgrounds and expertise, and also to give you the chance to maybe ask questions if you have any, and be part of the discussion. So I am joined today by Chip McAnulty. I can never, you told me. Who is recently retired after 20 years as a drama, film, and broadcast journalism teacher in Colorado Springs, Colorado, in the US. He holds a PhD and a master's degree in diplomacy and international affairs, as well as a bachelor in fine art in the theater arts. So a lot of different expertise that came handy in our conversation. Then we have Ashley Telly, who is a researcher of media, communication, and social informatics. She held research and teaching position in Turkey, Malta, Switzerland, the US, South Africa, Germany for 20 plus years. And she's interested in nonviolent strategies in building alliances within communities and learning from grassroots movements. Then we have Nicola, who is an independent consultant and trainer specialized in creative and innovative approaches to peace building, conflict transformation, and conflict prevention. He worked with vulnerable groups on reconciliation and peace issues in post-conflict and conflict-affected societies, especially in the South Caucasus. And he's working at aidóni on peace building and conflict transformation related topics. Finally, we have Yusser, who completed her graduated studies in political science at the University of wealth in Canada, followed by graduate studies in the same field. She studied state building, conflict, and displacement in the Middle East context. She works in academia as a graduate teaching assistant, a researcher at both universities and think tanks. She's also worked as an information management officer at the UNPD in Cairo, Egypt. So as you can see, we have a bit of a diverse group, which is very aligned with the way we do things at aidóni. We think that conversations are just so much more interesting when we step out of the silos that we work in and create opportunities for exchange of ideas, expertise, and shared advice. And I think that the fact that we come from different backgrounds is what made the conversations we had to build the guide so interesting, the guide such a valuable resource. So now I am going to start asking questions because I'm not here to talk the whole time, despite you might be thinking from those first minutes. And you, sir, I wanted to start with you and ask you, as you were part of the team shaping the guide from the beginning, working with aidóni, why do you think it was important to center local peace builders' voices, and how did their input change your own perspective on conflict reporting? Because you're not a journalist by training.
Yes, thank you, Malene. That's a great question to start with, and thank you for the introduction. So really, basically, the answer to how their input changes is exactly why it matters. Their input is not only to add, the human story that centers them to as the owners of the story in the narrative, but it also brings us as close as possible to the source. So that leads to more accurate reporting. It's more, even if we're doing political diagnosis, that's even more accurate. And it makes us very close to the source. And it's not just also because of being close to the source, but because these people also don't only experience conflict, sometimes they actually shape the trajectory. They are both, part of it, but also sometimes the very people who report on it and work on it. So it's about representation, not just participation. And that's where they ought to be. And it's also important because when we ask them and we get them involved, we get to know how they define things in their own terms, instead of us maybe projecting things borrowed from either another conflict or maybe from academia, where it could be just divorced from the reality. So yeah, that's pretty much that.
All right, thanks. I realized that I forgot to tell people that we will leave time for questions at the end of the session. If they have any, you can already, as they come to you, put them in the chat. If you want the question to be directed to someone specific, one of the speakers, please write their name. Feel free to do so, and we'll come back to all the questions at the end. Yes, so thank you, sir. And now, Chip, I wanted to ask you if you could tell us a bit about what made you want to join the workshop during PeaceCon and want to be involved in putting the guide together.
Yes, well, good day wherever you're at. Thank you all for tuning in. It's wonderful that you're interested in the guide that we worked so hard on. So I just want to say thank you. So I attended PeaceCon for the first time last year online. I had just retired from teaching. I had also just completed my PhD in international affairs with an emphasis in mediation and conflict resolution. So I was attracted to this conference sponsored by the United States Institute of Peace and the Alliance for Peace Building. I attended online, and when selecting workshops to attend, aidóni's emphasis on ground level peacekeeping journalism really caught my eye, and so that's why I signed up for it. But then once we were in the workshop, there was a breakout session, and we broke out into different groups to engage with the scenario, which is also included in the guide. And in the breakout group I was in, I had a great time. We had good chemistry. I was with Nicola and Laura, who couldn't be with us today, but we had a really good time. There just wasn't enough time to fully engage with material. And so after the conference, when the opportunity came up to assist with this guide creation, I was actually pleased to be a part. And I just have a small part. I don't have in-the-field journalism experience, though I did teach it for decades here in America. So I viewed my job with aidóni as more of a cheerleader and a sounding board for the others who do have direct experience. And I was just tickled pink to be a part of it. And so that's how I got involved, and I was glad I could do just my little bit. But again, thank you all for attending. Appreciate it very much.
It was not such a little bit. You brought interesting insights into the conversation, and at the end, put together a whole workshop to help people practice and put in practice the recommendations. So that's not nothing. All right, Yusuf, back to you. You worked across law, academia, humanitarian responses. I mean, you've been busy. Where do you see journalism fall short when it comes to conflict and displacement narratives?
Thank you, Milene. Yes, so I guess journalism often captures like the visible crisis. Things that it would miss would be, I think, the architecture of the actual scene. So things like sanctions, legal frameworks, or even historical debates, and not just the very present moment. And things that perhaps could have really shaped the very present. So narratives does matter in the way that they've frequently flattened into maybe binaries. So now we have victim and perpetrator, we have war and we have peace, and we have, just binaries, and we don't have room for the in between where people maybe could be actually are. Maybe these people don't even have active agency to speak. They were not part of the decision making processes, and their stories are overlooked. And they're not used even in the political language. And that's why maybe journalists are not even inspired to knock at these doors and ask questions in that sense. But I've also experienced, even in the progressive journalism coverage for humanitarian affairs, things like covering perhaps resilience and resistance without covering, for instance, the vulnerabilities and the cost of the heroic story that's being celebrated, or maybe using jargon like refugee or IDP, international displaced person and stuff of this sort, which dominates headlines, but without really explaining to people what do they mean, or asking the sources of if these political and legal categories actually do define them, because people maybe fall in a different definition of these labels that are being projected on them. So I see many stories that are written for an audience in that sense, perhaps unfamiliar with the conflict itself, or have not lived through it. But that disconnects people from the accountability, perhaps deepens misunderstanding as well. So we need that kind of translation and that close, familiarity with the source. Yeah.
Well, thanks. And Chip, you also worked at the intersection of different things, including diplomacy and education. In your view, what are some of the most overlooked blind spots in how international media frames peace processes? And how could journalism maybe shift to better reflect the complexities that are at play?
So yeah, thank you. Great question. In my view, the greatest tool in diplomacy and peacemaking is dialogue, and most importantly, two words that we very rarely hear anymore: active listening. Active listening is listening without judgment, trying to get a full understanding of someone's position. But more important than that, what are the needs and wants beneath it? I feel like international media tends to focus on the conflict at that moment, something that Yusur just referenced, right at that moment when the voices are loudest and they're in crisis. And at that point, listening is very, very difficult. A very important tool for journalists is interpersonal communication, asking the right questions, like Yusur also said, going up to the door and asking the question, but also being active listeners. Too often in our social media world, as consumers of news, we tend to be siloed in our conversations, talking with those who agree with us, or simply making posts without ever having to listen to anybody else. So journalists, and what aidóni is trying to create with this guide is the journalists are important because they seek to talk to all groups and create conversations and the needs between the siloed groups. And so going back to this guide seeks to encourage journalists of their role as a facilitator, starting with the end in mind. And we hope to create conversation between the groups to promote understanding. And as Yusur also said, I just want to second, giving a fuller picture to this the histories that couch all the conflicts. And I think that's what this guide does a really, really good job of. It seeks to go from the crisis to what's underneath it, and then hopefully to the peace at the end, however tangentially you want to define peace. But that's what this guide does, and that's what we're hoping to do. Thanks for listening.
Of course. Um, Ashley, so you studied grassroots movements and knowledge commons. Could you maybe briefly explain what knowledge commons, I'm sorry, is? Because I don't think everyone maybe know about this, and it is a very interesting topic. And then tell us what lessons from those spaces can help journalists better cover conflict or build community trust.
First of all, thank you so much for the wonderful and warm introduction, as well as all the work, all the collaborative work in putting this guide together. Yes, I've been interested in knowledge commons since I think beginning of my, let's say, research career. And it's actually a very interesting coincidence today because it's Dialogue and Diversity Day, 21st of May. And it's a global one, as adopted by UNESCO in 2005. So today marks the 20th year, and in terms of valuing grassroots action, that actually is a valuable part of the knowledge commons. So knowledge in the open, and also very welcoming of all the diverse viewpoints. And also a part of the public, commons of the public, and nothing private intervening, and everything independent about it, which is, basic principles of journalism and the ground in the field. I'm really humbled to sit back and reflect on our Peace Journalism Guide together today, which is, like I said, the Dialogue and Diversity Day. Grassroots movements and knowledge commons offer valuable lessons for journalists covering conflict and building community trust, as we've been saying since the beginning of this meeting. These spaces emphasize participatory storytelling, transparency, and decentralized knowledge sharing. These are basically principles that can reshape journalism to be more inclusive and credible. This can also, among the principles, center marginalized voices. Grassroots movement prioritize those most affected by conflict, ensuring their perspectives lead the narrative. Journalists can adopt this by amplifying local voices, which you will find very well stated in the guide. It can also enable collaborative knowledge production. So knowledge commons thrive on collective input, where information is co-created and verified by communities. Journalists can engage in participatory journalism, inviting communities to contribute insights, fact-check, or co-report stories, reducing bias and increasing accountability. From my own experience working with community-led initiatives, this perspective also enables participatory and independent publishing, development of open source tools, especially free liberated open source software for data journalism, as well as peace journalism, of course, and it ensures accessibility in deprived settings. It also ensures transparency in process, so grassroots organizers often operate openly, disclosing decision-making processes. Journalists can document their reporting methods, share raw data when it's safe, and explain editorial choices to combat distrust. It can also facilitate long-term relationship building, so movements succeed through sustained engagement, not one-off coverage. Journalists should invest in ongoing dialogue with communities at that instance, moving beyond parachute reporting. That's what we call sort of the reporting that is on conflict zones but happening elsewhere. Also, no lasting trust is built. And last point would be ethical storytelling. So grassroots efforts emphasize consent and agency in storytelling. Journalists must avoid extractive reporting by ensuring subjects have control over how their stories are told. So these practices, if adopted, can shift from being outside. Journalists can help journalists shift from being outside observers to collaborative partners, and produce accurate, equitable, and trusted coverage, especially in conflict zones, so via peace journalism, where top-down narratives often dominate. This is what we're trying to save, actually transform and change. So the result informs, but also empowers communities, and is empowered by these communities' lived experiences in journalism perspective. Then journalism finally addresses needs of grassroots communities when and where it is most urgent.
All right, thanks. Nicolette, talking about this, you've also worked with conflict-affected communities. How can journalists align more closely with the peace-building efforts without compromising their independence?
Hi, thank you. I think that the most important, thank you again, like also for this talk, and like it's really nice to be here and part of this conversation. So I think that first it's really important for journalists to not take one-sided perspectives. Like I would say like something very good would be like to be open-minded and to talk like to everyone, like the most people as possible, to hear everyone's opinion, everyone's stories, and like to diversify and to have different sources. So I think that diversity is really important. And if you don't have that, you don't know what the other is thinking. So it really helps for the audience and for journalists, and even like for people who are like in the conflict affected society, like to know who is thinking what and to communicate more. And I think that journalists could align more with like peace building efforts in playing with all these different sources and ask themselves, all the people they work with, they interview, etc. Why the opinions of these people are different, but also why they're competing, why they do not even have the same perspective at all, even not the same story or the same history. Why is that so different? Also, something important would be like to not make any presuppositions, so not putting people or situations into boxes, into stereotypes. I'm talking about my experience, of course, but for example, like diasporic communities do not act the same than people they're from, like in the like local people in the other countries. So I'm talking about the Armenian context, for example, where people in Armenia, open-minded or traditional people, like progressives or traditional people, do not think the same that diasporic people in France who are like descendants of genocide survivors. And as a journalist, this could be like very important to separate both and to not think when going in another country, okay, so diaspora people I have in my country are completely different from the one I have there. So that's why journalists won't be good if they replicate what they have in the region and they think that this is similar what they have in their community they're reporting on. So like, for example, again, on the Armenian context, like what's understood in France, for example, and used by the political parties is completely different from what's used from the understanding in the South Caucasus. So peace building is about like people and communication, dialogue, and understanding the other, about building sustainable peace in the time, like in the future. So trying to communicate with these people, what are they, who are they, what's their backgrounds, where do they come from, and their needs, and what's their motivation, why are they here, especially if they are internally displaced people or refugees. So talking earlier about the diaspora in France, why are they here? Genocide survivors. Then you like make the links and everything. Why some stayed? Why some like moved and everything? So it's important like really to go on the ground and talk to people, not only leaders, generals, UN people, but like really really like grounded peace builders, like on the ground, and to like people who are really affected by the conflict, and not like gender-less perspectives. You don't only interview like men, which are like leaders at the UN and stuff, and women crying on the ground with the babies in hand, but trying also to diversify this kind of stereotypes and this kind of views. So diversity is key, I would say, to have the broad and full picture and try to understand what's going on.
All right. Thanks. And I guess that to tell those stories in a bit different way, it might be interesting to get a bit creative on how we tell stories. So I'd like to go back to Chip. So as we talked about, you spent years teaching storytelling through drama, film, and journalism. What do you think journalists can learn from storytelling disciplines when it comes to reporting on conflict and peace?
Yes, thank you. So I'll put on my drama teacher hat. And so how I always introduced my classes, which were obviously drama classes, I'd say these three words: drama equals conflict. So that simple three-word sentence reduces all of our entertainment and books and TV and movies down to its essence. So drama equals conflict. Now, this is why we like it. This is why we watch it. Now, to use an American example and demonstrate my nerd cred, take Star Wars. So Luke Skywalker wants to stop the Empire, but leading the Empire is his own father. Talk about a conflict, right? So the question we follow is, how will that work itself out? Now, that makes for great drama. Person A wants this, person B wants this, conflict equals drama. However, that's entertainment. In real life, conflict is really stressful. We don't like conflict. A lot of us avoid conflict. However, like storytelling in reverse, journalists can help us as readers, also people who are in the conflict, understand the dynamics that are at work based on what is going on beneath the surface. One of the things the guide talks about is PINs, positions, interests, and needs. There's a position, but there's also interests and needs that are below that. And a good journalist, the type that aidóni is looking for, breaks that down to its essence. So getting back to our guide is that, and you've heard it from all of us, Asli and Yusur and Nicola, that we want to help journalists seek to discover by investigation, questioning, and active listening what lies beneath the positions that are going on. Again, international media is just talking about the crisis at the moment, what's happening right now, where voices are loudest. But by sharing these principles, aidóni hopes that peacekeeping journalists are really telling stories, but in this case, they're true lifelines. And by doing that, by giving a broad, full picture of all the players, that means every single player, we're combating disinformation, but also stopping to other our antagonists. We don't want to make them other. We want to make them our fellow peacemaker. So aidóni's community-centered journalism is really all about promoting conversation, dialogue, and understanding.
All right. Thank you, Chip. So now I'd like to go more about the importance of hope, imagination, starting to picture what comes next. Because when we talk about conflict, hope and imaginations are not exactly things that we think about, but they are crucial things for people living it, but also just to be able to even begin to imagine an after, and we need to imagine and to make it real. So you've studying state building and worked with young researcher. What roles does imagination plays in peace narratives, and how can journalists make space for it?
Thank you, Melaine, for the question. This is a very interesting question, thinking about hope. And I guess if you want to talk about resisting the status quo, then it makes sense to think outside the box. Essentially, imagination could be, it's not abstract at all. It could be very political. In context of war or displacement, imagining peace could be a really radical act when you are amid the turmoil itself. It could be the start of resistance or wishing for change, the change of the status quo. State building tends to be or to prioritize maybe control or borders, often functioning within the preset metrics or parameters, whether of international law or classical international relations in the state's black box. But imagination, it opens up space, for justice, for thinking about memory, return, and it's a tool for people, not just for journalists or peace builders. And it's essentially, it's hope in its most mere sense, most human sense. So we imagine alternative scenarios through imagination. And from my own experience working with young researchers, I saw how imagination offered them tools to claim maybe futures or narratives that are beyond the vocabulary of maybe trauma or things that they were boxed within, if I can say that. Journalists as well can use imagination in the mediums they choose to reach people, for example, in the ways they present their stories. Of course, never in a way that fictionalizes people, or because people's stories are not fiction, that's real, and not to alter the narrative. But there's room for imagination. The question is really creative, and I really like it because, as I said, it's a way to resist the status quo. It's a way to employ something to find gaps. So like maybe solutions that are not covered, maybe as well asking new questions and involving and investigating actors that are not even in the picture. So they're not even marginalized people. They are not even in the scene to be in the margin. So you just have to be creative to find them and to find where they are, and also to have stories and to look at your subjects in perspective outside the metrics and the indices. So humanitarian metrics and checkboxes and indices and stuff of the sort are already preset. That you go into the field and you already have preset things that kind of make you not creative, because you project things that you have to check and use. But when you just leave yourself to the community, learn from the community, and they can, be inspired by their own imagination as well, talking and asking them about their dreams, the scenarios that they imagine for themselves, perhaps the solutions, and they could be a source of inspiration for that sort of imagination as well. And they could be the source of the next question and the next story, basically.
I love that. It reflects me that, so I teach all of them also, and sometimes I hear that students are told that they should never ask questions if they don't know the answers. And it horrifies me, because how can you discover and how can you actually learn if you're supposed to arrive knowing, like all knowing from the beginning, especially if you're not a journalist from the community that you are reporting. So yeah, thanks for that, Yusser. Nicola, in peacebuilding work, have you seen examples of media contributing to reconciliation or healing? If so, what made them effective?
Actually, not really, or like very few. That's pretty rare. And like right now, the first thing that pops in my mind is that there's media or journalists that do this kind of work, contributing to reconciliation or healing. They do not aim for sensationalism, exactly, at all, not at all. So they do not take one side or the other. They do not shame and one side, like they do not talk about the other as the enemy. Of course, if something really terrible is happening, they will report on that. But they will never say, okay, so these people are terrorists, these people are like the evil. So when talking about war and its effects, or like the people affected, usually they're not focusing on differences. So they're always trying to make both sides interact and finding the root causes of the conflict, of the dispute, and trying to understand below what's visible and below the differences of people. I don't say they want to create a common heritage, but at least they want to find common ground and to find something common to go forward with the other. So it's never about who started first, whose fault is that, but what's made this issue, what made this problem or conflict started. So most of the time they could, like one or two I have in mind, I don't really remember their names, unfortunately, but they always commemorate anniversaries of slaughters, independences, and they ask for the recognition of some territories or of genocides, of very big events or symbols, to say, okay, we need to recognize that, we need to now go forward and acknowledge that this happened, to deal with the past, to make reconciliation. And usually they also talk about history, but they also can be careful with that. Usually, like, this kind of media, or I mean, the one or two I know, and like usually if I would have some advices to make, I would say that this is always good to explain why this, talking about genocide anniversaries, explain why they're not recognized, why one government says, oh, I don't think there is one, and try to make the history of that and try to understand the underlying structures under such political arguments. Because what is a bit weird on one hand is that everyone wants peace, but like the means to achieve it are very different. Like everyone would say at the end, we want peace, we're like peace builders, like we only aim like for an amazing and peaceful world. But some will put this into practice with the war crimes, genocides, horrible stuff, rapes and stuff like that, and some other would be peaceful. But like what is important would be like to understand why some of them are motivated to act in a certain way and why some of them are motivated to act in another way. So what are these motivations and which lead to these actions, human rights abuses, etc. So these motivations, they can be like human rights values, or they can be like racism, money, power, like very classical, but also control of resources, like a dictator or his family who wants to stay in place, cultural power, like linked to gender, religion, etc. So there's always like this underlying structure, and I think that this is really important when trying for journalists to heal and reconcile people, to just put that together and say, okay, so this is not like, this is about also the structure, and try to reflect more and go like underline. I think that peace building is also about observation, like finding solutions, dialogue, communication, non-violent communication. So I don't know, maybe let's try to be original and when possible, like compare interviews of conflicting parties or talk to them together or separately. I mean, together if possible, regarding what's possible, but try to make dialogues and create spaces for conversation and highlighting local initiatives, local peace building initiatives, what like this NGO is doing or this person. So yeah. And try to be independent, not stick to a billionaire's media, and like try to be as much as independent as possible, even if that could be difficult. Yes, and stick to human rights value and principles for whoever we're talking about. I think that's the most important when trying to heal and reconcile people together.
I think that resonates with a lot of people, especially given the news lately. Ashley, and then we're going to open questions to the audience. So if you wonder about something, want more information, or have something you would like us to talk about, start typing. We'll come to you right after Ashley answers my last question. So Ashley, you often speak of liberation and weaving communities. What might what we call liberatory journalism practice look like in conflict-affected contexts? And maybe, as always, last time, like if you can start maybe by defining a few of those terms, because maybe they're not widely known, but I think they are an important vocabulary and base knowledge to have to really understand and move forward in how we report on peace and peace building effort. So go ahead.
Thank you, Meline. Thank you. I really love this question, not because it actually has all these new words and concepts in it, but also it's something that's been inspiring me for a pretty long time. I think we're also learning and at the same time trying to somehow transform the language of peace and turning it into more of a nonviolent and dialogical communication perspective, as very well put by Nicola. So I really would like to somehow mention the Weaving Liberation Initiative before I go to the definition here, from which I have been inspired in a lot of ways. It's an initiative that highlights the long entangled colonial and imperial powers impacting the global majority and focuses on the case of Europe. Lately, this impact is multiplied by the so-called fourth industrial revolution by corporations and big tech. I think also, Nicola, I keep just referencing what he has shared before me, but he was speaking about the millionaire tech or millionaire corporate power. This is exactly what I'm referring to. Rights violations against livelihoods is exacerbated also by digital means. And the initiative that I'm referring to, the Weaving Liberation, proposes a design framework for decolonizing digital rights in Europe. So within a similar framework, actually, a liberatory journalism practice in conflict-affected contexts would center on dismantling oppressive narratives. So narratives as well, not only rights and action, but narratives itself. So the discourse in the journalism field is actually very significant. And weaving communities through collaborative, healing-centered storytelling. This is also something we've been focusing on, and also among the advice that we're giving in the guide. And inspired by liberation movements as well. So in those terms, what we're trying to actually focus on is challenging dominant power structures. So we've been saying this a lot of times. Also amplifying, instead of amplifying elite or militarized perspectives, prioritizing marginalized or voices that do not appear at all. I think Yusur put that very well. So the voices that are missed and are not on the scene, exposing root causes of conflict, like inequality, colonialism, rather than just symptoms. And of course, co-creating stories with communities, like weaving journalism would become a collective process, where affected communities shape narratives through participatory methods. We call this citizen journalism or oral histories as well. We would also prioritize repair over sensationalism, avoiding trauma highlight or so-called trauma porn, let's say. Liberatory journalism would focus on solutions, resilience, and communal healing, restoring agency to those harmed by conflict. And even maybe somehow more attractive than that would be building solidarity networks. So journalists would act as connectors, linking grassroots movements, peace builders, and audiences to foster collective action rather than passive consumption. This is something we're trying to also somehow shift from, the passive consumption. And finally, embody ethical accountability. So reporters would submit their work for community review, ensuring consent and accuracy, while rejecting extractive reporting, so hit and run reporting. Of course, on an ideal note, ultimately, liberatory journalism wouldn't just document conflict. It would actively resist dehumanization and weave, create new narratives of possibility, grounding its work in justice and collective care.
All right. Thank you so much, Ashley. I think it was a nice way to kind of go back to everything that has been said up to now. I don't see any questions at the moment, but if people don't have questions, it's fine. I do. But before that, maybe I was wondering, because you speakers at this event. If there's something that your co-speaker talked about that you would like to go back to, that you have a questions to one another, maybe. If there's anything you would like to go back to develop, this is also your space. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't find a raise hand in this here. But I just wanted to comment on Asli's comment earlier regarding knowledge commons and just really this idea of knowledge and engaging with the community, the source of how we learn about the conflict, the source about how we learn even about solutions, because many journalists kind of do a lot of their homework and there's a lot of stress on them in their own home institutions to do their homework and to study about the conflict. But I think it's also important to lead yourself to the field and learn from your source as well. They can lead you to how to learn. It's not just community engaged learning that is often really, applied in humanitarian practice. It could also be in the very craft of narrative writing, learning from the source and, with a snowball effect, getting to know how to know, because there's a lot of histories, there's a lot of ways to know about the context as well. And I just wanted to kind of tie that a little bit in the margin of what Asli was talking about. And I think it was also part of our conversation and what the guide was essentially, aiming towards.
Anyone else want to jump on it? Oh.
Yes, thank you, Yusur. Maybe just on that note, to reflect back to what we've been aiming for and pivoting, would be to just regard the guide as a work in progress. So I mean, it's not really possible to collect all the advice together or see what's happening currently in the field, and also hear anything possible from the communities, or come up with the best case study so that it's an exhaustive one. This is really not possible. So in that sense, we would really love to hear any suggestions, comments, contributions. And we already have a plan for that, which I think Milene would be announcing. Would that be at the very end, or am I too impatient to say it now?
I can do it now. And then we have one question. So go to what you mentioned, and then we'll go to the question. So yes, as Asli just explained, this guide is an ever in progress tool. Just because we're not presumptuous enough to say that we found the way to do things. It's a frame to use. As you will read in the preface, we are fully aware that each situation is very unique, has components that are very specific. So what we're giving people is a direction, a tool to start new conversations, maybe challenge the way we think and the way we do things. So we are very open to learning from anyone who would be interested in having that conversation with us. I will share right after an email to contact us. And also we are thinking that in the next weeks, month, might be a bit before summer, might be right after summer, we would like to organize discussions, writing sessions, where we could have other people from different backgrounds with different experiences coming and telling us about their experience, either as a journalist uncovering peace, as someone who lived in an area, community affected by conflict, and tell us about the impact on journalism, if there was any reporting, because sometimes there's no impact because there is no reporting, and then it also says a lot and its impacts in different ways. So if you want, I will, again, right after, share a link where you can give us your email address, and as soon as we do plan those sessions, you will be informed and you will be invited. The more, the merrier, as we say. And we are really looking forward to having conversations, learning, being challenged on what we put on the guide. So yes, always super excited to hear from others, to collaborate, whether if you want to work on a project, an article, anything else, even if you have the beginning of an idea, just reach out and we'll see what's possible. While I share those links, we do have one question from Joe. Has peace journalism ever had unintended negative consequences in the communities it aimed to serve? So I would think that this might be a question for Ashley or you, sir, as working a bit closely. Maybe Ashley, do you have any examples or important stories?
Not very specific,
No.
but I can actually just dwell on a few stereotypes, since the concept of peace journalism was quite new during the Iran-Iraq war. So and a lot of the journalists that ended in the field were called a part of the embedded journalism experience back then. So what was happening was that so there were already military personnel in the ground, or even soldiers in the hot war zones, and those zones were actually really tough for the journalists to appear, but somehow they embedded themselves to the war machine, let's say, and to the hot zones of the war, and tried to do their reporting. Of course, this was mostly not with bad intentions, but because it was back then, it was really hard to get over the news like we have today, since technology was not that advanced and there was nothing called social media. So we were basically just relying on mainstream news media or public news, which was also just not really out in the open too much, or which was filtered. And so in that sense, these journalists, even though they did their best, it just so appeared that the grounds that they covered would just not really draw the transparent picture of what was happening in the conflict zone, in terms of the equity, the balance of measures, and also in terms of the humanitarian, let's say, perspective. So we also saw a lot of sort of makeup that had to be done on the news, and just any sort of sensational news that was brought from the ground, even though this was basically just to deliver what was really happening, to inform the public. So in those terms, even though intentionally peace journalism was to be created, what the public received was something completely different from that narrative that was intended. So that's one of the maybe earlier examples. I can also cite other examples, but I'm sure you, sir, would have more current evidence in that area.
Yes, very briefly, I can highlight just a very term at that time as well, when we go to Iraq or Afghanistan or any other place where the term terrorist was really at the center of the news. Just the very, not really critically thinking about the term and going into the news, or even the practice of peace building, when this word is just taken for at a grain of salt, and not reviewing what does it mean and who is it referring to. It did make an like a legitimacy cover for a lot of acts which were not even questioned, whether it be bombing a place or a country, a city, or even not questioning why is this operation happening in the first place. And at the very same time, people, if they're from Afghanistan or from Iraq or elsewhere, when they were in the countries meeting, they are the other, being in the US or in Europe, that had consequences beyond the borders of the actual place where the conflict was happening. So there was hatred and racism and stuff of the sort. So it was just really a misleading issue, and it's just one term that really did kind of change the entire narrative. And is that accurate, I guess, in covering things of the sort? It's very sensitive in that sense.
And I don't know if anyone else wanted to add something on that matter. Yeah. Or maybe myself as a journalist. Yeah. Oh, Chip, yes, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I was going to say, as a journalist, where I and as a younger journalist, because I did my studies in the last 5 years. We talked about peace journalism, but it was, very briefly. And I did, which maybe it's a bit worrying, but I did a master where the second year I specialized in war and conflict covering. And we did talk about peace journalism, but it was maybe one session, and amongst other ways of covering in a more constructive way, which is more than what you would get if you stay on the general journalism without specializing in a specific topic, because usually in many countries you specialize in skills, so like writing, filming, documentary, radio, and not exactly on topics. So you don't get to have to be trained. So even if you're interested, first of all, you have to know it exists. You have to be interested, by those circles. You have to be curious and go look for different ways of doing it, and you can do it. I did it. I went to look for information, and I'm not unique. I'm not special. Many other people do, but it's a work that you have to do on top of it, and you kind of have to learn by yourself if you're not able to have access to trainings. Some of now, a few trainings are free and accessible, but which means that there's no official education on how to practice this. They're not new forms of journalism, but they're starting to be known by a more general audience and a broader number of journalists. But it's still a lot of learning and trying. So I think there are a lot of good intentions, but then we have to take into consideration the way we are taught journalism, the way people we work for are taught journalism, because if you're just writing, in the end, it's the editor who's going to have the last call. Not all news media have very open discussions about how we did the pieces. Sometimes you don't really see what your piece looks like until it's printed somewhere. So those are limitations, and it also means that there is a more systematic change that needs to come in and to be done, and with the whole reflection of the profession and the field, which is happening. It is happening, but it takes time, and we're gonna mess up sometime. The thing is that when we talk about conflict, the consequences can be a lot bigger and more important to do that. So it's also our responsibility and our obligation to, when mistakes are being made, acknowledge them, being open about it, being like, okay, here is what I meant, here is what happened, and here is what we're putting in place to make sure we're going to do better, and it won't happen. So yes, I don't know if we answer your question, Joe. We're getting to the end of the event. Please go ahead. Sorry, I talked a lot.
I'll be very quick. One unintended consequence is, if a journalist in peacekeeping is doing their job right, they're going to give such a full picture that it's going to step on some toes, ruffle some feathers, because it's going to challenge everybody's conventional narrative.
Yeah. Well, couldn't agree more. I think it's a good way to end this. Anyone has one last word they want to share, or are we good?
Let's say thank you, Milene.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, all the participants as well, and all the organizers.
An ever-evolving
Yes,
tool.
thank you for coming.
Well, yes. So thank you, everyone, for spending a bit of your day with us. I hope you found this conversation interesting. Maybe you learned a couple of things. Maybe it challenged your views. Maybe you completely disagree with us. And then please also let us know, because we also like to be challenged. As you can see in the comments, you can find the guide, you can find our website, more information. I also write a contact if you want to get in touch. I mean it when we say we want to hear from you, we want to get to know you and have conversations. So please do not be shy, just reach out. And yes, for the speakers, we're going to hang out a little bit together. And to everyone else, have a good day, a good afternoon, a good night. I have no idea where you're based. But thank you. And until next time, bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.